Guys, welcome to a classic movie review of 1974's The Conversation, starring Gene Hackman, John Cazale, Robert Duvall and Harrison Ford. Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, this is the tale of a paranoid, secretive surveillance expert who has a crisis of conscience when he suspects that the couple who he's spying on will be murdered. Now, The Conversation is a quiet, slow-burning classic that's often overshadowed by the gangster epics of its director, who somehow, in the same year he released The Godfather Part 2, managed to drop this paranoid little gem. It didn't have mob bosses or severed horses' heads in beds, but what it did have was Gene Hackman at the top of his game, a tape recorder and a whole lot of anxiety. Let's take a look.
Kill us if he got the chance.
So Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation is a masterclass in subtle storytelling, a slow-burning thriller that trades explosions for paranoia and spectacle for introspection. Coppola had seen Antonioni's blow up a year or so before he wrote the script for this, and unapologetically used its concept, but transferred it over to the world of audio surveillance. Now, filmed between Godfather movies, this film marked a pretty powerful contrast to the epic scope of that gangster saga, because this is a quiet, methodical and deliberately restrained techno thriller, and features Gene Hackman as Harry Caul, a surveillance expert who becomes ensnared in a moral and psychological crisis when he hears a couple mention that a mysterious third party would kill them if they got the chance. And it's this single line of dialogue and how it's heard and how it's interpreted or implied that holds the key to a larger conspiracy. And so we have this solitary and intensely private surveillance expert and his associate Stan, played by John Cazale, hired to record a conversation between a young couple in San Francisco's bustling Union Square. But as he meticulously pieces together the fragmented audio tapes, he begins to suspect that the couple may be in danger and that his work might lead to their harm. You see, the agreement with his client, the director, played by Robert Duvall, is to hand over the audio recording of that discussion. But Caul has a crisis of conscience. And this is where The Conversation begins to get its claws into you. There's no real and obvious villain in The Conversation and no clear-cut heroes, to be quite honest. It's one of those movies where tension is built on atmosphere rather than action. Hackman's growing unease stemming from a few words repeated and re-examined. Now, Gene Hackman delivers one of the best performances of his career as Caul, one that's so subtle that it often gets forgotten in favour of the more showy roles, the French Connections, the Poseidon Adventures, his Lex Luthor in Superman. Here he's super shy, trench-coated and nearly silent in his private life, but his Caul is not the typical screen hero. He's withdrawn, socially inept and haunted by a previous job that ended in tragedy. Now, Hackman's brilliance lies in the discomfort that he brings to his character here. Mumbling, his nervous tics, his obsession with locking doors and protecting his privacy. It's a role that's 90% internal, and it honestly may be his best work. Of course, there's a great supporting cast here that adds depth without ever overshadowing Hackman. John Cazale himself, between Godfather movies as Fredo Corleone, has a typically understated role playing Caul's assistant, Stan. He's the type of guy who wants to understand the ethical implications of basically spying on people's private lives. And obviously Hackman's character has an emotional distance to it all, so they make an interesting pair. Cindy Williams and Frederick Forrest play the recorded couple, and Robert Duvall, in a fairly brief but quite important role as the director, is as close to a villain as we get, as a mostly off-screen threat that looms over the film. And of course, an uncredited Harrison Ford turns up, much like he did in Coppola's Apocalypse Now. And elsewhere we get Elizabeth McRae's working girl Meredith and Terry Garr's undemanding kept woman Amy as the two women in his life that reveal his inability to both commit and share emotionally. And I love the annoyingly vulgar surveillance industry competitor Bernie, played by Alan Garfield, whose outspoken cowboy ways are in direct opposite to Hackman's uptight character. So Coppola's direction here is great and it's very meticulous, and it was maybe too meticulous for its time as audience didn't warm to The Conversation when it was first released. He obviously uses Antonioni's blow-up in the way that he obsesses over the interpretation of recorded media and questions the reliability of what we see and hear, or how we perceive what we see or hear. Now, Coppola stages shots as if they were filmed with surveillance equipment, making us feel like we're spying on the plot as it unfolds, all coming to a head in one of the greatest final shots in the history of film. Now, Walter Murch, the film's sound editor and designer, deserves a huge slice of the credit here, not only for his manipulation of sound, the crackling tape loops, the inaudible whispers, the distortion and the clarity, as Hackman replays the conversation layer by layer and its meaning begins to shift, so does the tone of the film. The sound editing doesn't just complement the story here, it is the story. Murch, by all accounts, even took over the actual editing of the movie due to Coppola being knee-deep in assembling The Godfather Part 2. Now, of course, in this modern age of surveillance and mass data collection, the conversation is somehow more vital and unsettling. We all take our privacy for granted, happy in the ignorance of having most of our behaviour tracked and traded until something goes wrong. In an age where smartphones, social media and AI routinely harvest our data, Harry Caul's obsession with privacy feels eerily ahead of its time, even if Hackman's analogue paranoia now seems a bit quaint in the face of today's digital omniscience. Of course, the conversation was released during the Watergate scandal, though written before it. Its themes of surveillance, privacy invasion, and distrust of authority may be hitting a raw nerve with American audiences. So between 1972 and 1979, Francis Ford Coppola made The Godfather, The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, and Apocalypse Now, which are no less than a handful of the greatest American movies ever made, a trajectory that was impossible to maintain. He did make some interesting movies after this, of course. Rumblefish, Bram Stoker's Dracula, etc. Although his recently released Megalopolis is astonishingly poor, which is a real shame. Now, with The Conversation, he got to employ a pace of storytelling that's deliberate and restrained, and that ultimately rewards patient viewers with a depth rarely seen in mainstream thrillers, certainly these days. It's also a bit of a visual treat in its own understated way. The cinematography by Bill Butler dispenses with the postcard charm often associated with San Francisco and casts it in a cold and lonely light, all long shadows and tight frames. Now, this movie isn't a typical thriller. There are no car chases, no dramatic shootouts. It's psychological, it's slow, and it's deeply unsettling. The tension builds not from what you see, but from what you hear, and how the meaning of a few words can shift everything. Here, Harry Caul is not driven by a desire to solve a mystery or stop a villain. He's driven by guilt and uncertainty. Now, The Conversation doesn't provide us with easy answers. It drip feeds them. In the pantheon of 70s paranoid thrillers like The Marathon Man, The Parallax View and All the President's Men, none have such a detached view of humans at the mercy of technology or end on such a chilling and ambiguous note. Go check it out.
He'd kill us if he got the chance.